Since it's two, we
Good.
can kind of start getting rolling. Thank you,
Mhm.
everybody who's joined us. This is our very first live event. It's kicking off a series that we'll be doing monthly called Polite Conversations. And every month we'll feature a different expert or leader or just a really fascinating person that has experience in everything from plant-based medicine to, of course, cannabinoids, and all the different aspects of wellness that, us as a community are interested in deepening our knowledge about. So just a quick introduction for me. My name is Sue Tan. I'm one of the members of the founding team of Polite, and the hat I wear most of the time is kind of everything creative. So our brand, our design, our packaging, our product experience, even our user experience is something that I champion. And unlike Dr. Giles, I was relatively new to the world of cannabis and cannabinoids. So, you know, most of our founding team are veterans and pioneers from the early medical days. And so I guess I bring that fresh perspective of a lot of our customers and users who may be, unsure
Mhm.
and never had previous experiences or even had bad experiences in the past. So I kind of always bring that fresh lens of like, okay, how is this for someone who may not be comfortable yet or who doesn't understand? So you are the exact opposite. You've been
Mhm.
working with plant-based medicine for many, many years as a practitioner, as a researcher. So yeah, do you want to give our everybody a quick introduction to your background, how you got into integrative medicine, and
Mhm.
maybe the various focuses that you've had within that world?
Yeah, definitely. I found kind of integrative and alternative medicine, probably first alternative. It migrated toward integrative later, and I can explain kind of what that means. But originally, because of course we were talking in the beginning, I was raised in the Midwest where there isn't a lot of access to alternative medicine at all. It's pretty, I don't want to say primitive, but kind of primitive, or not as progressive as the
Okay.
West Coast for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
but I had had some years with health challenges, mental health, physical health, and conventional medicine just made everything worse overall for me at that point in my life. And I also had seen it really harm family members, friends. And I kind of just got curious, got curious about alternative health after it helped me essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of I was very inspired that this is the path for me. I want to do this as a career. It made perfect sense. It just, all the pieces of my life kind of fell into place at that point. And it became a really big passion and interest of mine pretty early on. And yeah, decided that I was going to pursue it and become a doctor of naturopathic medicine. And I always are, at the same time, very interested in Ayurvedic medicine, yoga, started doing yoga very young, got into that. So kind of weaving it all together, all of these various aspects and paths in my life. And with the goal of eventually bridging the gap between
Mm-hmm.
conventional and alternative medicine, being a good voice, being able to swiftly navigate the waters of both and speak both languages and speak to, conventional medical oncologists and pediatricians, and then also be able to speak to people in the wellness industry or medical cannabinoids or all various kind of aspects of that. But that came later. So my interest I always tell this story, so anybody who knows me has heard it a lot, but my interest in medical cannabis came through watching primarily my grandmother really suffer with cancer, stage 4 metastatic disease. And toward the end of my last semester in undergrad, we had to do a meta-analysis, a research paper. And I had heard all this stuff about medical cannabis and for cancer, and I was like, it can't be real. And I also had a lot of background at that point. I was really getting into medicinal mushrooms primarily
Mm-hmm.
at that point for cancer. So
Mm-hmm.
I looked and I really dove into the research. What kind of research is there for both, really? We also looked at melatonin, but that's kind of a side tangent. So what amazed me most about doing that research was that I had thought about cannabis. First of all, at that time, I thought, oh, people are just using it as an excuse to get high. Like, it's not legitimate.
Like a loophole.
A
Yeah.
loophole, or
Yeah.
I mean, it increases appetite, and it makes people, feel good. So sure, if you have cancer and you're in pain, or you're not eating, or you're nauseous, sure, those were the reasons to use it. But when I started to actually dive into the literature, I found out that there was a lot of data at that point that supported anti-cancer benefits of the various cannabinoids. And that is also the time that I really started learning about CBD and all of the various potential, beneficial effects of CBD versus THC. And, with all I knew about medicinal mushrooms at that point, I was really amazed to see that the anti-cancer benefits of cannabis really rivaled mushrooms, which was incredibly surprising for me. So from there, my interest, of course, was piqued. I didn't necessarily know at that point. Obviously at that point I had an interest in oncology, but didn't realize how much that would bridge out, and really got into oncology at medical school at Bastyr, at naturopathic medical school. And again, continued that research, especially because in the state of Washington, NDs are we're experts in plant medicine. And so we often do medical marijuana or medical cannabis authorizations. So for me, knowing that I was at that point that I was going into oncology, I had to ask myself, what are some pitfalls? What are safety issues? What should I be aware of? If I'm going to be actually prescribing this or advising that people use this, I want to know what I'm up against and what kind of potential for harm there is. And I was pretty impressed, outside of a few caveats, there are things to be mindful of, there are things to be aware of, there are things I monitor and track, but generally it's very, very safe, very effective. I've seen it help tremendously get people off of various medications, side effects, just so many benefits that I've seen. And so when I entered residency, surprisingly, I didn't get a whole lot of training within my doctorate about
That sounds like
cannabis.
a common theme for physicians.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what kind of training conventional medical practitioners get. I think basically none, is what I've heard.
Probably.
Oh yeah, definitely less. We had about 5 minutes in one module about formulations, using it for musculoskeletal pain, and that was it. And I was shocked, because I'm like, we are plant medicine experts. We are at a school where this should be not only celebrated, we need to be competent. We need to be cannabis competent as a profession. It doesn't make sense that there's still a stigma within that community. So most of my knowledge came from self-learning. Diving into the medical literature, of course, my training, and then in residency.
And your personal experience with your grandmother.
And my personal experience. Right.
Yeah.
And so I found physicians, that were really in alignment with that. And those are my attending physicians. I'm nearing the end of my residency, and they were both one actually had his PhD studying cannabis. And the other has a lot of experience with it as well, because she's a naturopathic oncologist. So, in the past couple of years of residency, I've just learned more and more and more and more. And I do tons of authorizations for all sorts of things. I'm constantly learning from my patients, because if I have somebody coming in with a condition that I haven't seen before and they want medical cannabis, or I think it's indicated, then I have to dive back into the literature. So I'm constantly learning, and I'm super excited, just because of how well it works and how few side effects there really are for most people, especially when we're using lower THC concentrations versus the other cannabinoids.
Yeah, but we'll dive into the formulation side a little bit later, because Dr. Giles, you were instrumental, and you continue to be instrumental in the ongoing research and development of all of our wellness formulations. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think as a practitioner, I think it's one thing a lot of people now have anecdotal, personal experiences with the benefits of cannabinoids and cannabis-based medicine. But as a healthcare provider, you have that broad view of many different types of patients, health conditions, contexts. And so, I'm really excited that we get to talk to you today, because you have that meta view, and not just coming from a personal point of view, but, with a whole base over the many years of treating people and helping people. So one of the things I wanted to start with is, you are on a daily basis, you have patients, you work with other doctors of all different areas of specialization. What are the most common misconceptions that you face and hear. Let's start with patients first when it comes to cannabinoids. Yeah.
Yeah, with patients first, you know, the first thing is that they're afraid they're going to get high and they're going to hate it, or they've had a bad experience getting high in the past, you know, college or something. No idea what they were using. They just smoked some pot, felt terrible, and they're kind of terrified to even go there again. So the most common, of course, misconception that I hear is that you have to get high if you're using any medical cannabis, and of course that's false. THC is the main constituent that gets people, you know, that is psychoactive. But there are certain concentrations, everybody's different, that of THC that they will feel cognitively, and there is a threshold below which they won't feel it and they still get benefit. So that's a conversation I always have to have with patients. Then of course there's a lot of misconceptions about, oh, I'm weight gain, and am I gonna, like, because people have these misconceptions about the munchies. There's a lot of other misconceptions, of course, about am I going to be addicted? Is this going to be habit forming? Am I going to get hooked on this? I don't like to use something that I'm dependent on. And again, there's a lot, it's a very nuanced conversation, but I would say those are the main things. And then people don't want to feel, along with feeling high, they don't want to feel out of it. They don't want to not be able to function in their own lives. They don't want to be impaired, or they don't like that feeling. So I would say those are the main misconceptions I hear. And there's a lot for my patients. There's a ton of stigma within their workplace. And there's a lot of fear of, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to lose my job? And am I going to put something at risk? Am I going to put my FMLA at risk? Or if they've gotten injured at work, you know, things like that. So there's still, even in Washington state, there's a massive amount of stigma that I'm up against, especially with pediatric patients, but definitely with a lot of patients working in healthcare, or patients working for the city or for the state or for the country, you know, federation, things like that, or military. I mean, there's so much, like, there's still so much residual stigma that I have to unwind a lot of that.
That fear, yeah. And I think I speak to a lot of just friends and people where, even from family, you kind of, you know, people still feel they have to justify it or hide it. And so kind of there's almost like a cultural, emotional hump you have to cross first, right? Even before you start to experience or are open to experimenting and seeing if it works for you. So on the healthcare practitioner side, you know, you already mentioned, you know, even at integrative medical school, you barely learned about cannabis. So what has been what have been misconceptions with other physicians and healthcare providers that you kind of hear often?
Of course, number one misconception is danger. It's dangerous. It's going to hurt somebody. A lot of, I would say what I hear most from conventional providers in particular, who are not well-versed, who are not, you know, cannabis informed. It's just that, well, I don't know anything about that. I can't speak to that. So I'm not going to write you an authorization or talk about it. So you're going to have to find somebody else. You know, that's probably number one, is that at best, they just don't want to touch it. At worst, of course, they say that's dangerous. It's going to interact with your medications, which it may or may not. That's kind of
you have to case by case
providers.
Basis.
Case by case basis. You have to look into resources. You have to know where to find that information, which is something I do all day long. And so, you know, those are the biggest things. It's going to hurt you, or it's dangerous, or it's going to get you high, or you're going to get addicted. I mean, it's kind of very similar things.
The overlap with.
There's overlap, and a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, they will think, I think also a lot of conventional providers just aren't aware of the benefits, and they might discount them without actually looking into it, which is, again, my job as a provider, is communication with those conventional providers. And if I'm sharing a patient who's an oncology patient or a pediatric patient or something, I always send the best degree of evidence that I can find about why I'm recommending something. Also to educate them, you know, if they don't want to write the authorizations, fine, they don't have to. If they don't want to read the literature that I provide, fine, they don't have to, but at least it's there for them to self-educate if they want to. And we are known, the clinic that I work at, we are known for doing work with medical cannabis. So there are some pretty good conventional providers who will say, I don't know, but I do have a clinic I can send you to, and they can probably help you out. So that's more so here, but still a large degree of stigma, and still sometimes it's surprising even in Seattle how resistant some providers are, even when it's like really an extremely well indicated medicine for somebody, where it's like hitting so many, checking so many boxes and helping them so much, and they'll still be like, I don't like it, you know, but that's more rare, I would say.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing is, like, just through my experiences and talking with friends that are in the industry, sometimes it's the thing about cannabinoids is it's becoming like, it's bottom up. I keep, it's, you know, people keep getting so many patients that come in and tell them like, I'm using this and it's helping me. And then they hear that enough and they're like, well, something's up here, you know, like maybe, I mean, I need to go understand and educate myself. So I think one really fascinating kind of juxtaposition with the world of cannabinoids is it's this centuries old natural medicine and herb, you know, that has evolved with so many civilizations. And so there is this kind of deep history of human use, cultural use, spiritual use, but at the same time, it feels like we're just at the tip of the iceberg in understanding it. You know, like the endocannabinoid system was only discovered, you know, in the past few decades, and there's only so few cannabinoids that we even have solid research on. So, you know, how do you make sense of this kind of, you know, I don't know if juxtaposition is the right word, you know, these kind of contrasting dynamics of cannabinoids and cannabis?
You know, it's kind of an age-old question within natural medicine in general. This kind of is a larger theme of historical, traditional use or empirical data versus the molecular sort of biomedical, physiological model, where we have a lot of more information about, you know, through the scientific method of receptors and all of that, you know, that whole conversation. And I guess that's sort of the point of being a naturopathic doctor in general, is to be able to walk both paths and bridge those and bring them together, because we do not believe that traditional or historic usage or empirical data should be negated, or we should say, oh, well, it's you know, garbage, throw it out. It's, you know, Ayurveda has been working with plant medicines, including cannabis, which was, you know, ganja, for millennia. Indica comes from India, you know, so the cannabis has been there for a long time. Bhang is a traditional formulation using cannabis. So we have a ton of data on how it's going to affect people, but it's within a different frame of reference and using different language. Now, the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that we actually do have a ton of scientific data on cannabinoids and cannabis, but people don't look at it, and people don't, again, but the problem is a lot of it's preclinical data, where we're looking at petri, you know, in vitro petri dishes or in vivo animal studies like rats or mice, and none of that is going to translate perfectly to a human body. And so as far as clinical data, we do have a pretty large body of evidence, but it really depends on the condition, especially with clinical research. And so but you can extrapolate, and so that's the thing, is that we especially amongst plant medicines, like there's so much information, that research that we have, but it does take a competent physician to be able to translate that preclinical data into a human being, and obviously there are a lot of unanswered questions in that. So that's where we try to, especially at the clinic I work at, we do outcomes studies, outcomes research. So we actually look at, are these things helping people? And and then we're going to publish all that data, so we can have some framework of, does this work? You know, do these things work at a clinical level? Again, we're not looking at molecules and receptors in the body, not us personally, plenty of people are, but we are more interested in the clinical outcomes of things, especially with cancer or other complex medical illness. And cannabis is often a part of that treatment plan. So yeah, we need more research, we need more answers. There's always more to be done, but we can also draw on that traditional wisdom, because if it's been working for 8,000 years, then
Yeah.
it will probably still work, even if we
Yes.
don't know the exact mechanism yet.
Yes.
But we
Yeah.
are learning more and more and more every day. So I think it's really exciting. There is a huge body of evidence, and we just need to keep asking the right questions and running
Mhm.
the right trials.
Actually, it's a good time to shout out to Ames Institute. Do you want to
Yeah.
tell everybody a little bit more about the really amazing progressive clinic that you're a part of?
Sure, yeah. So Ames Institute, it stands for Advanced Integrated Medical Science Institute. And like I said, we are a research institute doing outcome studies, but we have a very large team of integrative providers, all sorts of providers. We have an MD, PhD, an ND, PhD, multiple other naturopathic doctors. I also specialize in Ayurveda. We have psychiatric nurse practitioners, doctors of psychology, lots of people working together, different subdisciplines within the naturopathic team there. So, and then in-house medical cannabis consultants as well, SMJ Consulting operating alongside of us. So huge team, we're doing all sorts of different things, mostly chronic complex illness, including cancer, a lot of oncology, but also chronic pain, neurological rehab, a lot of musculoskeletal issues, genetic syndromes that cause musculoskeletal issues, a lot of autoimmune issues. So any of the above, tons of other stuff as well. But we do a lot of various things. One thing that I do aside from medical cannabis authorizations and integrative oncology is psychedelic assisted therapy, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So using drugs off label in a psychedelic fashion to really break through old trauma is the main thing, and how trauma impacts physical health. We're very interested in the overlay between mind and body, and they're totally inextricable. They're completely entangled. They're not separate. And we recognize that the relationship of trauma with chronic illness later in life. So that's something we address pretty profoundly. And we do a lot of really great work. It's a pretty amazing place with a lot of pretty amazing providers. I do love the work that we do there.
I hope that becomes the model, not just for integrative healthcare, but for healthcare in general. And we are seeing all the symptoms of healthcare being not whole person based. So I'm always so in awe of the team that is there, the work that you're doing. It's so progressive, but I hope that becomes the norm and it's not progressive.
Right. Yeah. And we hope so too. I mean, something I didn't mention is we do a lot of trainings. We do a lot of education. There's a lot of education, both medical education, as well as really teaching other providers to do what we do. And that's another thing, is that we're really adamant about communicating with other providers in a person's care team with chronic illness. People have a lot of doctors, and a lot of things get miscommunicated or not communicated. So that's a huge thing that we do. And again, trying to bridge the gap between people who are more conventionally minded and then people who are more alternative, and saying, hey, everything we
it doesn't have
do
to be two
more or
worlds.
less. Exactly. We can bridge this gap. And we also do have a lot of evidence. We're not just coming out of left field. It's not just 100% woo-woo. Maybe there are elements of that. That's okay too. But this is all based in good data that these things actually work. And here's the research. And that's a big thing that we're trying to do, because we really want to show this stuff does work, and we want it to become more mainstream. We want people to accept it more. We want conventional medicine to say, hey, this works. So that's a huge goal of all of ours at Ames, and whole person care, and really getting to the root cause of why people are sick or unhappy, or both.
Yeah, on a personal note, you shared about your grandmother. A big part of why I'm part of this team is because my late father had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and at that time there was no Ames in Seattle, and so he kind of had to piece together his own integrative approach. So he actually found an acupuncturist through really kind friends in the industry. They provided my brother, who then passed on the right balance of cannabinoids, to him to get through chemo. So
amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit is also empowering people to see the bigger options beyond just what conventional medicine offers, which is not, which is right, but there's a bigger picture too, right? That can actually treat the mind, body, that bigger context that has such an impact on how you handle disease.
Yeah.
So you know, we mentioned, you know, you at Polite, you know, we call you our physician formulator, you know, one of our physician formulators. And so I wanted to dig into, you know, when we started with the vision of creating these targeted formulas, you know, based on just as healthcare providers, as people, you know, what are the things we struggle with on a daily basis that could really improve our quality of life? You know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what were the basic values or principles that we and you as a formulator kind of brought to the table before we even started detailing out, you know, the optimal concentrations of the different formulations? Like what were kind of just the core principles of how we wanted to approach cannabinoid-based, you know, options?
Yeah, of course. So I think number one goal for everybody was we wanted them to work. We wanted these to be effective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we had theories and ideas and hypotheses really about how we could make that work. But that was number one, is we want these to work, and we want them to work at a lower dose than potentially other products, based on really, again, this is where we go back to traditional understanding of botanical medicine. Almost all traditional herbalism formulates. You don't just use one plant on its own most of the time. Traditionally, you mix them together and they all work better together. You need less of each individual plant in order for them to have the same, or actually a more powerful effect. So
so Entourage Effects applies to all of botanical medicine, not just
right.
cannabis, then that term sounds like.
Exactly. And so that's exactly what I was going to say, is that you, in cannabis, you have the entourage effect where, you know, all of the cannabinoids work together and terpenoids work together to be stronger. They're stronger together than just taking like a CBD distillate, for example. And so something that I brought to the table is that I had that theory, because it's not something I see done with cannabis very often. And traditionally in Ayurveda, that's how all herbs, including cannabis, is used, is with other herbs. And you, again, you need less, but you have more powerful effect. Part of that on the biomolecular level is constituents and synergy between constituents, as well as the endocannabinoid system. So I think a big common misconception is people do not understand that a lot of things enhance the activity of the endocannabinoid system, not just cannabis or cannabinoids. So other herbs do that, exercise does that, you know, chocolate, cacao, a lot of things actually enhance the activity of the endocannabinoid system. And so one thing we wanted to do, I think, with the formulas is look at botanical medicine that has been well researched and or used traditionally for a long time, and with constituents that will likely magnify the certain aspects of what cannabis does as a medicine, especially higher CBD formulations. So there's a lot of immunological effects. So we can add some herbs to enhance that and make that more prominent. There's a lot of analgesic or pain relieving effects. We can add other plants that do that as well, but magnify it, increase it a bit. Pump that up, or the clarity enhancing, or the sleep enhancing, or the, you know, relief of rumination in the mind, things that, so we had a lot of other plants that do this too, and do this really well. But we also know that cannabis, especially certain ratios of cannabinoids, both major and minor, they do these things really well too. So our goal was to get that, just strike that right profile of cannabinoids, and with the right supporters that will enhance certain aspects of what cannabis, especially CBD, again, with these minor cannabinoids, what it does in the body for physiological effect, and to get actual results. That was the big thing. So it was really a combination of both traditional ideology and traditional wisdom with a very modern approach. And what we know, not only clinically, but at the biomolecular level, what do these things do? And we wanted to avoid just single constituents only, because of that entourage effect, not only within the plant of cannabis, but with these other supportive botanicals. I think that's something that's frustrating in conventional medicine is that there are so many molecular targets with cannabis that they don't like that. You can't track just one receptor. There's so much going on, but we are using that to our advantage. And another thing that we wanted to do was to have standardized doses so that people can get the same effect every time. They can use it reliably, and it's not going to sometimes feel super strong and overwhelming and other times not work because it's not strong enough. You know, we wanted it to be consistent for people. And especially for me, you know, as a provider, I was really struggling with having good product recommendations for my patients, you know, for certain things. And it's really nice to have something that I know reliably works and that I can say, hey, try this. And this is the dosage that I recommend, and then to see the effects.
And you have a master's in Ayurvedic sciences. So I think a lot of people, again, now that essential oils and herbs are kind of becoming more mainstream, I think it's one thing to enjoy using them and have a positive effect, but I think, you know, it's another thing to have actual clinical experience and understand the impacts of different plant medicines and herbs. And so you know, your background in Ayurveda specifically, you know, how has that influenced you the most in terms of approaching how to formulate and how to treat?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of it is thinking about which plants are going to synergize and which plants are going to drive those constituents deeper into the cells. So again, you have a bit better effect at the cellular level. Of course, Ayurveda didn't talk about it in those terms. It used different language, but it had the exact same precepts. And again, the other thing that it provides me clinically in general is looking at a person, and rather than seeing them as a diagnosis or something, you know, wrong on a genetic level or something, I see them as having certain imbalances and certain qualities out of whack, and you can just balance that by opposing those qualities. And so thinking of the formulations, thinking of the herbs that we used as what is going to apply constitutionally and what is also going to be pretty much across the board well tolerated. Nothing that's super, super, super hot or super, super, super cold. Nothing that's super dry or super moist. Nothing that's going to be more super activating or super sedating. I mean, unless we're going for that, but really things that will be likely well tolerated by everybody with few side effects that are going to make things substantially worse. So we tried to go across the board pretty neutral, safe, but really effective choices in those supportive botanicals that we used. And again, things that I know work, and it just has there's a different perspective on why things work in Ayurveda, but that is something also that is being well researched at this point. And we know so much about why these things work, both the constituents in the plant medicine, as well as even some more abstract sort of approaches to detox. We know they still work. You can measure markers of metabolic integrity before and after these treatments, and guess what? They actually improve. So sometimes the why isn't important, often it is. But what we've found with these formulations is that I haven't found anything yet that's super imbalancing for people, or it's again likely to be well tolerated by most people. Not every, we can never say everything 100%, but lower risk, I think, than normal of adverse events.
One of the, you know, as I take a deep dive into understanding cannabinoids, one of the fascinating things that, you know, you and Mary and other people on our team told me about is how, you know, you actually, it's a misconception that more is better, right? I think, you know, with the growth of the recreational market, there's often this paradigm of like, just give me the most THC for the lowest amount of cost, and like that's what defines good, you know, or good value. And you know, clearly, if you understand integrative medicine, like that's not the right approach. But I think, you know, can you speak more about that? I guess it's a misconception, right? That more is always better. And in
definitely.
terms of cannabinoids, in terms of THC, you know, I guess you could apply that to many different aspects.
Yeah. I mean, something, again, we can go to the Ayurvedic lens for a minute, and anything that is taken in excess that the body can't process turns into toxic accumulation. I mean, if the body can't process it, it's just going to build up and be unprocessed and kind of hang around and cause problems. So you don't want to overdo something. If your body can't burn through it, can't metabolize it, it's going to do harm. It's not going to do good. So
Yeah.
that's something that we really wanted, is we wanted the lowest effective dose to be pretty low, and we want people to be seeing effects at a lower dose, because there's a time and a place for megadosing cannabinoids or megadosing herbal medicine in general. There definitely is. But in general, especially for wellness, you often really don't need that much, and more is definitely not better, especially when it comes to THC, because that is where things can go sideways with cannabis, is if people are overdoing THC, especially what I refer to as unopposed THC, meaning the THC
what does that mean?
So super high amounts of THC, low to no CBD or other minor cannabinoids, maybe even terpenoids. I mean, and all of the research shows that the problems happen with that. So very high THC strains or very high THC distillates, things like that. The complications and the side effects and the issues, both with mental health and physical health, are with high THC only. So that's something that you don't see in any of our formulations, is high THC with no other CBD or minor cannabinoids, because the safest, most across the board for almost everybody, higher CBD with little to no THC is going to be pretty well tolerated by most people. There's going to be outliers in any given situation, but definitely you cannot say that about THC. With high THC with little to no CBD, is going to be well tolerated. No, absolutely not. So more is not better, and a lot of people, just a tiny bit of THC helps them with something, but then too much, and they feel terrible in one way or another.
I feel like a lot of people who have had bad experiences, it's almost like THC ruins it for them, right? Where it's like, well, you never got to explore the health benefits because, nobody, it's not their fault. There was no guidance on, hey, this thing you're about to eat or take, it's not optimally balanced for the outcome that you want, right? Although sometimes you do want a certain outcome, you don't, and there's plenty of options for that. But for our, range of products, because they're wellness based, there was that intent, right? And I think that's a good segue into this other principle of looking beyond CBD and THC as hero cannabinoids, right? So all of our formulations are full spectrum, and depending on the targeted benefit, CBG or CBN plays a huge role in providing impact. Can you speak more about kind of how our industry is starting to just move the conversation beyond THC and CBD?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the most exciting aspects of cannabis research right now, is these minor cannabinoids, because we're finding that they have huge benefit and huge effects at very low doses. So it is very exciting. There was just research posted or published, I don't know, a week or two, couple weeks ago, about CBD and CBG as being potentially even more active in glioblastoma multiforme, which is the most aggressive form of brain cancer. Very poor outcomes completely, but it responds extremely well to cannabinoid therapy. And it's always been viewed as, based on research, 1-to-1 CBD to THC. And now all of a sudden this new revolutionary paper comes out and it's like, wait, CBG is a superstar for this particular type. That needs to be a part of the conversation. CBD, CBG, not, THC fine, because we do have good literature, but you need to add this one. So things like that, where we're just learning more and more about the benefits. The other really nice aspect of that is that, again, they're non-psychoactive in the traditional sense, meaning all of these minor cannabinoids, including CBD or CBG and CBN, don't get people intoxicated, inebriated. CBG is going to be really helpful for things like depression and anxiety and gastrointestinal issues, definitely with a lot of other things. And CBN is going to be really helpful for sleeping, because it's the sleepy cannabinoid. When people use THC, let's say somebody uses an edible or somebody who smokes cannabis smokes it, as they get sleepy toward the end, it's because of the THC breaking down to CBN in the body. So we can bypass that for people who don't tolerate THC or can't use THC for some reason. There are a lot of reasons that people can't use it. So bypass it, give them CBN, and they're getting that sleepy benefit without having to have the psychoactive effects of THC. And then again, CBG helps with mood, etc. So Those are the two biggest players that we know right now, but there's CBC, there's a ton of other things, not to mention all the terpenoids that we could go into. But we do know, not only clinically, but through research, that these have pretty huge effects and at very low quantities, which just supports, of course, the entourage effect and everything we found, that they all work better together. But we can really optimize the effects based on those ratios.
Can you speak a little bit too about how, beyond just cannabinoids working better together, there are specific dynamics like how CBD can even offset some of the less desired, effects of THC sometimes, right? And how, consuming them together is not just better, there's specific molecular or, chemical interactions going on that create, a more, I guess, a more wellness-based experience, right?
Yeah, definitely. So that's what I always tell people, especially patients who are really hesitant. Again, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, if somebody maybe in high school or college smoked pot and they got really paranoid and really fearful, scared, hated the way it made them feel, super out of control, scared, whatever, and they never returned to any cannabis, that's what I tell them is CBD actually has the opposite effect. So they're antagonistic to each other. So it's good for things like psychosis. CBD has really positive effects for psychosis or for alcohol withdrawal or for other drug withdrawal. CBD can be tremendously helpful for reducing cravings for various substances instead of being more addictive or the potential to want to overdo like THC has. So they're really actually, and that is at the receptor level. Kind of. Exactly. Yeah. And at the receptor level, it's the way they affect the CB1 and CB2 receptors are different. CBD primarily affects the CB2 receptors, which is in the periphery, but at the CB1 receptor in the brain and the central nervous system, it antagonizes. It actually brings it down versus THC, which is an agonist, meaning it ramps it up. So something that I tell patients all the time, and we always have a plan on board, if I am escalating up their THC very, very slowly for some reason, like pain or something else, and they're THC naive or have had a bad experience, we go up very, very slowly and always have CBD on board, especially if somebody kind of overdoes it a little bit. You can always just take a lot of CBD and it will actually at the receptor level reduce some of those effects. It's the antidote, exactly. Within the plant, it's the antidote. There are other things too, terpenes and whatnot, but within as far as constituents, CBD will do that. So again, with our formulations, all of them being high CBD and low THC with various ratios of the other minor cannabinoids, there's a very low risk unless somebody took like a heroic dose. Even so, because of how much CBD there is, it's a very low risk of having those paranoid, fearful experiences. They might, if you take enough THC, of course, it's going to be psychoactive. But as far as kind of that scarier experience, that's going to be mitigated a lot. And people are also able to ride it out a little bit more. If they overdo it and they're like, ooh, that was too much. They'll be able to just kind of roll with it until it wears off instead of being super triggered, which is something we're excited about. And again, people don't really need that much to have the benefits. So they can generally bypass the psychoactive effects of THC because they don't need to take that much while having a really good benefit because of the other cannabinoids and botanicals.
We need to do another session just devoted to the trial and error that people need to go through to find their optimal dose. I think that's a huge question and challenge that people have. So in the future, I feel like that would be a really informative one. But something, as I learn more about the history of cannabis, I hear a lot that, the pot that people smoked in the 60s, like it was so different than what is on the market now. And I know part of our philosophy is to almost like rediscover the original balance of cannabis, right? Because from my understanding, the super high THC, it's almost a byproduct of economics, right? Of needing high yield. What are your thoughts or your point of view on, is the way we're formulating actually a return to kind of maybe how the longer human usage of cannabis was in civilizations and in societies?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. You can think of most of the cannabis that existed, especially in India and other places where it originated, was hemp. It was a lot closer to hemp, which is high CBD and very little
Mm-hmm.
THC.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, basically through genetic selection and humans just genetically modified through hybridization or breeding of the plants, higher THC because people wanted that effect. But still, even when, traditional use or traditional cannabis, for example, in Ayurveda, um, it just was not nearly as psychoactive because there was
Mm-hmm.
THC there and they had selected somewhat, but it's nothing. Even today in India, the cannabis plants that are used are very different than what we've
Yeah.
selected for in the States through
Mm-hmm.
hybridization, and other, developing areas where cannabis has been used, more recreationally in particular. But yeah, so it's all genetics, and we have kind of altered it beyond recognition, as far as which is very common with most plants, most crops that we use, most
Mm-hmm.
food that we grow. I mean, corn, we
Mm-hmm.
could go into a whole history of that. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
completely different than the original, progenitor that developed through nature. So we
Mm-hmm.
have selected, and I would say that our formulations are going to be a lot more in alignment with, the way cannabis originally grew. Although, of course, we don't have data necessarily on the various ratios. And so we're using, wisdom of science, really. We can say we're
Yeah.
using, and now our current use, our current clinical, and preclinical data about, again, especially these minor cannabinoids.
Mm-hmm.
So we can generally go back to those higher CBD, lower THC, genetics, and then add these other superstars to make it work better. I don't like the idea that we can make nature work better than nature works, but when it comes to illness or medicine, we kind of can, because especially with the degree of complex chronic illness we have, that's totally unprecedented in the history of humanity. I mean, we have to kind of bring out the big guns a lot more than we ever would have had
Yeah.
to previously, because the degree
Mm-hmm.
of imbalance and illness is astronomical. So,
Yeah.
I think it's important for us all to kind of deconstruct, especially within the wellness industry, this idea that natural is always 100% better. It often is. It's more biocompatible most of the time, but there's a time and a
Mm-hmm.
place for everything. Ayurveda
Yeah.
says everything can be medicine, everything can be
Mm-hmm.
poison. It matters on dose, it matters on constitution, it matters on
Yeah.
season. There's where somebody is in space and time,
Mm-hmm.
within their body as well as within, the planet. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different factors. But the same thing goes with cannabis and various cannabinoids. Everything can be medicine, everything can be poison, but it
Yeah.
depends on
Yeah.
the dose and the person and the condition, all of those things. So I think that's a really important thing. I encourage people not to be super black and white about anything on any, because everything's
Mm-hmm.
a spectrum. That's something I've
Yeah.
learned through medicine
Yeah.
very, very prominently, through working with people and individualized plans, is that everything really is, it's true. Everything's really a spectrum.
And I think with natural medicines, you have to do the work yourself to really reflect and observe, like how did that affect me? Like, how did I feel an hour later? How did I like do I adjust up and down? Whereas growing up in a conventional medical context, you usually just take two and it has this black and white outcome, where I think with
Right.
natural medicines, it almost requires you to be much more attuned to
Mm-hmm.
your own
Mm-hmm.
body, your own mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a journey in that sense where you actually play a really big role in learning how you can get the most benefit, or learning what your limits are, right? Um,
Yep. Yep. And also, I think that it also goes to say that people who are nervous or who are totally naive to things like this, then have somebody who can kind of hold your hand and walk you through it, either a provider
mhm,
who can prescribe and guide you with dosing, or a medical cannabis consultant if you're a medical patient, something like that, having somebody to help you with that, and keep an eye on you and ask the right questions. If you haven't developed that kind of attunement of knowledge within yourself, then have somebody to mirror it back to you and ask the right questions. What did you notice? Because some of these effects can also be subtle. It's not always, now with cannabis, because it works so well, sometimes often it is really big and dramatic, and sometimes
yeah,
it's not. So having somebody to be able to touch base with you journaling, dosing journals, things like that as well, to be able to check in on a consistent basis and have somebody to mirror back. Also, family members. A lot of my patients will say, like, my spouse or my kids have been noticing changes and they're commenting on it. So using that feedback too, what's shifting.
Yeah. We actually have a question that I wanted to acknowledge. All the way from Ireland. Yay, awesome. So the question is, as a newbie to cannabinoids, how do I choose the best starting product for me? Or what signs should I look out for my body to give me indicators on what would suit my body and mind best?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, my answer is always it depends, and I would want to know more about kind of what this person is working with and what they're trying to invoke. But what I tell everybody, really, number one, as far as if you're brand new, is always start with high CBD and low THC, because THC, again, is that wild card. It could make it work way better for you and make you feel way better, or it could not. It could have the opposite effect. So across the board, most well tolerated, both at the physiological level and mental level, is high CBD, low THC. The other minor cannabinoids are going to depend, but CBG is generally across the board a good, safe one and really good immunological effects. So that's another one to get on board if it's available. The other main things I tell people is always organic, pesticide-free. You don't want pesticides in your cannabinoid products, so make sure whatever product you're getting, it talks about that, you know, at least pesticide-free. A lot of them can't be certified organic for various reasons.
They're grown following,
certain standards, or at least.
Yeah.
Exactly. Full spectrum also is a big thing. Again, I generally encourage people to avoid just distillates or isolated constituents. So full spectrum is a big part of that as well. And then always start low, go slow, and work your way up to the dose that whatever symptom it is or set of symptoms you're tracking, you know, just work your way up slowly until you realize those are better. And then if you want to go a little bit higher to see if they get a little bit better, great. And go, but you know, often, unfortunately, with cannabinoids, sometimes you have to go too far before you know where you get the maximum benefit. So then you have to back it down, but don't start with that, because you want to be comfortable and familiar with it first. And again, that's where some sort of guide can be helpful. But if you can't have that, just be very attuned to yourself. And also realize if something, you know, if you go too far, especially if there's THC in there, ride it out. It'll end. You'll be okay. Take some more CBD if you have more CBD. Have a seat, you know, lie down, just kind of ride it out to the best of your ability. It can be part of the journey when somebody's using this for either illness or wellness. But it does take, using cannabis as a medicine in general does take awareness and personal responsibility and personal agency, personal empowerment, and tuning into oneself and being honest with oneself on a lot of different levels, and really touching base and being aware and conscious about it. I think that's a huge important aspect.
Yeah, we have to actually learn how to be aware, right? Because I think a lot of us, myself included, you know, we aren't taught how to listen to certain signs, often until it's too late, right? So I think that's part of the whole journey of, you know, wellness, not just cannabis-based wellness, of just learning how to be more aware of your state of mind, state of body.
And I think also a big thing about that I think needs to be said, and I say this quite frequently, is that there also has to be a degree of respect for cannabis as a medicine. A lot of botanists would say that cannabis is debatably the most successful plant that has ever existed, based on how far and wide it's spread and how dependent it is now on humans. But it's very successful. But it's very powerful. That's because it's very powerful. And a lot of these really strong medicines, including the opium poppy, including nicotine, including, tobacco with nicotine, a lot of these, and cannabis, they're very powerful medical plants, and they must be used with awareness and with deep respect. And I know that sounds woo-woo, but it is an important aspect, because that's where, again, things go sideways, is people aren't using it with that awareness, and also with that kind of respect for, this is potent, and I'm going to tread lightly and not just take it seriously. It's a serious, powerful medicine. It has a lot of effects.
Definitely. Are there any questions from all of you lovely people out there tuning in. And by the way, thank you everybody for joining. I know it's your weekend, so it's wonderful to have everybody kind of take the time to tune in and listen. If there's no more questions, I have one final one. We have to do this again because there's so many things. You're such a wealth of knowledge. But I think, I feel like we really are living in an unprecedented era in modern times of cannabinoids, of even just this turning back to more holistic ways of looking at health, because the non-holistic way, we're feeling all of the consequences now, right? And so what are you most optimistic and excited about when it comes to this new era of plant-based medicine and cannabinoid-based medicine?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm really excited about honestly the research and all of the research that's coming out, and the fact that it is becoming more widely understood and more widely respected, and we're getting a lot of the molecular data, and we're getting a lot of the clinical data that these things work, and that this is again a powerful medicine. So I think the research is a huge thing that I'm excited about. Also, all the research on minor cannabinoids, on terpenoids. I mean, we're just scratching the surface. The synergy between them is, we're just scratching the surface. And then, of course, something I've been really excited about forever, which is part of why I teamed up with Polite, or how Polite found me, is that I'm really excited about the synergy between cannabis and other plants.
Yes.
Oh, did you lose me? Am I here?
My technology failed.
Are you good?
So can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Just making sure that my technology didn't fail. I can hear you.
No,
Yeah.
yours is fine.
So, okay, good. So yeah, bridging the gap between botanical medicine or herbalism, traditional herbalism, Ayurvedic herbalism, things like that, and then bridging that with science, with cannabinoids, and making these formulations to get the most bang for your buck, quite literally, but also again in the body, so that you don't need that much cannabis to have huge effects, because it has all of these other supportive botanicals. And that's something that I've been passionate about for a long time, and I think is drastically overlooked, especially in the Western approach to cannabis as a medicine. So having a line like Polite, having this, since we've made those and seen how effective the formulations really are, it's just confirming that for me, that like this is an untapped gold mine, and the more we can do this, and the more we can expand, and the more we can research, the greater effects we're going to have, and we can really optimize cannabis as a medicine with having little to no side effects, and have it be really well tolerated by everybody. Again, with a nuanced approach that there's no one size fits all ever.
Not a panacea.
It's not well, it is a panacea, but it's not a cure-all. It's a panacea because it does a lot of things, but it's not the only thing. It's part of a much broader approach and a much broader toolkit. And it is, I'm also really excited for it to be utilized more so in a clinical setting instead of, I'm really excited about training other physicians, training other medical cannabis consultants, training other medical doctors, people who don't have this knowledge, being able to expand that knowledge, because it will expand access, and it will expand legitimacy and acceptance. And that's
key.
Huge. It's super key.
Yeah. That's what I'm most excited about is access, right? And from so many aspects, right? Of course, you have the legal side of access, but you have the cultural side of access too, where you're talking about stigma, right? Where, access is also just about feeling and giving yourself the permission to try or use or even share it with your elderly or people that are going through different types of challenges, and having it be affordable, but safe and consistent and clean. And the first thing you said, the most important thing was it's got to work. Else access there's no point to have access to something that doesn't do anything for you.
Of course.
But we're almost up at the hour. Dr. Giles, it's been amazing talking to you. I'm so happy that this gets to be recorded and documented, and that many people can benefit from all the knowledge that you've shared today. We'll be talking to you many, many times over again. Is there any
Yeah.
last thoughts that you want to share with everybody?
No, I'm glad we had, I'm grateful to everybody for coming on by. Anybody can reach out to me, on Instagram, Facebook. I'm kind of on most of the LinkedIn, also Clubhouse, yeah, kind of all over. So people can feel free to reach out, ask questions. Of course, as we talked about at the beginning, I'm at Ames Institute in Seattle. We also do telemedicine. So you don't necessarily have to be in Seattle to have a conversation with me over the computer. So you can find me there as well if you want some more support with anything. And thank you for having me, Sue. I had a super fun time, and we're definitely gonna do a lot more of these. So if anybody has questions or ideas, definitely send them to Flight as well, because we can always do future conversations, and where people would like to go deeper or have deeper questions, we can have more focused conversations as well.
Yeah. So for everyone that joined today, we're going to be doing this on a monthly basis. Most likely, keep it to the weekend when people don't have to juggle. Well, not, more people don't have to juggle work and such. But yeah, look forward to many more of these. I'm so thankful for your knowledge, for your expertise, for your wisdom, and let's do this again.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Thanks,
Sue.
everybody. Bye.